Right. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. We are just waiting a couple of minutes as people are joining, and I see a lot of our elected representatives. So thank you all for joining us today. All right, welcome everyone. I'm just reading the chat as we are waiting. We are live on Facebook on the Montgomery County Democratic Party Facebook page, and this meeting is being recorded on Facebook and on Zoom and will be made publicly available following the event. For the best experience for everyone, please remain muted unless you are called upon to speak. Thank you so much. And with that, and without any further ado, we will get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shruti Bhatnagar, and I'm the chair of the District 18 caucus and co-chair of the precinct organization for the Montgomery County Democratic Party. Thank you all so much for joining us today for the ballot question town hall. I want to give a quick shout out and recognition to the elected officials. We have Linda Foley, chair of Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, Council Member Evan Glass at large, Council Member Friedson from District 1, Delegate Eric Lutke from District 14, and Delegate Jared Solomon from District 18, who are on our panel today. We also have Senator Will Smith from District 20, Delegate Pam Queen, District 14, Delegate Emily Shetty, District 18, Delegate Charkurian, District 20, and Delegate Carr from District 18. And from the county executive's office and from our very own District 18, we have Rich Madalino. So welcome everyone. And joining us at this time is also Delegate Janelle Wilkins from District 20. I hope I have not missed anyone, but I will continue to recognize elected officials as we go along. With that, I will pass it on to the chair of the Central Committee, Linda Foley.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see everyone again. I asked Shruti if I could just make a few remarks at the beginning of this town hall that's being hosted by these various caucuses and clubs, Democratic clubs. So just to review, I think maybe everybody, I don't know if you can see this, it's going to be backwards on my screen, but everybody probably received this flyer in the mail. This is where we, as the Montgomery County Democratic Party, outlined our recommendations to voters for how they should vote on these important ballot questions. So everyone knows that we have a tremendously important presidential election in front of us. You know, we've been waiting for a long time to get rid of the guy in the White House and get a president who is sane and humane in there to lead us. But in addition to that, I think the other really important thing besides our electing our congressional representatives are these ballot questions that we have, and they can be somewhat confusing to voters, and they can be sometimes difficult to ascertain, you know, what they mean. So I'm just going to run through really quickly what the Democratic Party recommendations are on these ballot questions, because I know that the panelists you have are going to go into detail about what they mean and what the implications are. So I'm going to run through them in the order in which they're on the ballot and the order in which they were on the card that you received in the mail. So the first one is question 1. That is a state question that has to do with state law. And we are recommending that voters vote for question 1. It allows the Maryland General Assembly to increase, decrease, or add items to the state budget, provided that those changes don't increase the total budget proposed by the governor. Many people don't realize it, but the governor of Maryland has more power than any other governor really in the country, in that he gets to really dictate what the budget is. So this would give our state legislature some say-so in that. We're also recommending that you vote for question 2, which is another state question. And that has to do with the expansion of commercial gaming and sports events gaming. It authorizes the General Assembly to allow betting on sports and other competitive events, and it's going to generate state funding that must be primarily used for education. The funding is going to go into a lockbox. The money is money that people are currently betting illegally on the internet, or going to DC, or going to West Virginia and betting there, and Maryland's losing a lot of revenue as a result of that. And then we move to the county questions. Question A, we are recommending that voters vote for question A. Question A has to do with the county property tax limit and the limit of the tax rate increases. It establishes a cap on the property tax rate instead of the total revenue that the county can receive, which is the way it currently is. And it would allow revenue to grow so that county services can keep up with increased population and needs. Any further increases, it's important to point out, any further increases in tax rates would still require an affirmative vote by all council members. It has to be unanimous. And that's what's currently required to raise the revenue limit. So to raise the tax rate would be the same bar, would have to be reached. Question B, we are recommending strongly that you vote against. Question B is a property tax limit, and it prohibits an override. And essentially, it prohibits the county council from increasing total revenue received from the property tax beyond the rate of inflation under any circumstances. It would hamstring the council beyond belief. They essentially would never be able to raise revenue. And it was proposed by Republican activist Robin Ficker, who's no stranger to people in this county. There's question C. We're recommending that voters vote for question C. That would increase the county council to 11 council members by essentially adding 2 more districts to reflect the increase in population that we've had, but would retain the 4 at-large seats that we have. So it would go, the council would go from 9 members to 11, and the district seats would increase from 5 to 7. We are recommending that you vote against, or that voters vote against question D, which would alter the county council composition to just go to 9 districts and eliminate the at-large positions. And the effect of that would be that it would reduce from 5 council seats to 1 council seats, the number for whom each voter could vote. So right now, I can vote for 5 council members to represent me, 1 district, 4 at large. And that would reduce, question D would reduce that number so that I could only vote for 1 council member to represent me. That, in a nutshell, is where the Democratic Party stands on these issues. Again, they're very important. This is a critical election in so many ways. I just want to, I'm going to have to jump off here because I have to go make calls for Joe Biden before the debate tonight, the great debate tonight that we have with Kamala Harris and Mike Pence. But I do want to say that I want to thank everybody who's been volunteering, who's been making phone calls, who's helped us deliver yard signs, who's written letters, who've gotten their ballots in. We're all working really hard to make sure that this election turns out in a favorable way, and that we can move forward both at the national level and at the state level and the county level. And I am getting more and more confident that come November 4th, or whenever the ballots are finally counted, that we're going to be celebrating a big victory all up and down our government. So, anyway, good. Have a good meeting tonight. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to Shruti.
Thank you so much, Linda. I also want to quickly recognize MCDCC members Erwin Rose, who was the chair of the Ballot Question Advisory Committee, and Daniel Koroma and Moomin Bare, who is also on the call. With that, I would like to call upon Delegate Jared Solomon to talk about the State Ballot Question 1.
There we go. I think I'm unmuted. Thank you, Shruti, and thank you to everybody who is here tonight, who has, as Linda said, volunteered to really make hopefully this election quite a success. Hopefully we'll have a better night in November, or whenever we find the final tally out nationwide than we did 4 years ago. But I wanted to talk just briefly about question one, which is pretty straightforward actually, and I think as Linda mentioned, really highlights something that we have in Maryland that makes us unique in not a great way, and something that most people don't really realize. It's the fact that our governor really has the executive branch has almost complete and total control over the state budget process. We are the only state in the country that has almost complete gubernatorial control. So in the legislature, and I'm lucky enough to serve on the House Appropriations Committee. I serve as the vice chair of the Education and Economic Development Committee. But I know many of my colleagues in both the House and the Senate can share in the frustration. We actually do not get the ability to really move money around in the budget. We have two things that we can do. We can either cut money or we can, quote unquote, fence money off. So we can advise the governor that we don't want money spent, on roads. We want money spent on trains, or we don't want money spent on this program. We want it spent on another. But the governor does not have to abide by that. He or she can choose to have that money just go back into the general fund. And under Governor Hogan, really over the last 6 years, he's done that more than really any executive ever. Our budget system is a product, frankly, of a 100-year-old issue. So back in the 1920s, Maryland and many state governments, including the federal government, didn't really have a budget process. It was, money was spent willy-nilly. There wasn't even really accounting of what the state had spent. So that doesn't really work, right? You have to know what's coming in. You have to know what's going out. And so, the state was in a really dire fiscal situation. And so, there was a movement of sort of the progressive era at that point to really put in place strict budget procedures. So when the federal government started to adopt the policy that it has today, and we really went, to the other extreme where it was thought that the legislature was too irresponsible to really figure out how to spend money appropriately. Again, we didn't even have an accurate count of what money was going out. We don't have that anymore. That's not a problem. What we're talking about with this question and this ballot initiative is really a restoration of a balance of power and moving to a system where you as advocates and you as as citizens can actively engage with your elected officials on your budget priorities, as opposed to having to figure out some opaque, bureaucracy and, some bureaucrat in a government agency that, 8 months before session even starts is trying to figure out what a budget priority looks like. So what this question would do is give the legislature the ability that, again, 49 other state legislatures in the country have to be able to essentially move money into and out of certain programs, to increase some pots, to decrease other pots, but stay, again, within the overall limit that the governor sets when they submit their budget in the beginning of January. So, that is a process that, frankly, has led to a lot of great outcomes. We are one of only 13 states in the country that actually has a AAA bond rating. And that's partially, again, because, there is a nonpartisan group that gets together with the legislature, with the governor, to come up with essentially what the spending cap is going to be for the coming fiscal year. And when the governor submits that budget, we are legally bound to have a balanced budget at the end of every year, and we are legally bound to not go above that cap. So if the governor says, you can spend $1 billion or $1 trillion, whatever the number is, we cannot spend $1.1 trillion unless we offset it with an increase in revenue. And so this amendment would keep that. We would not be able to go over the amount of money that the governor sets in their annual budget. We would just be able to move money around within it. And then most importantly, it actually gives the governor the ability to essentially line item veto. So if we increase something in the budget that the governor does not agree with, the governor will gain new authority to essentially veto that portion of the budget. And we as a legislature would affirmatively have to choose to override that veto. So again, there would be another check. So, if folks are concerned that, well, the legislature is just going to start funding, their own pet projects willy-nilly, there is a check and a balance on that in this new line item veto. And I think most importantly, this will actually improve our budget system. So we can create what's called a mandate in the budget, but we are not allowed to mandate spending in the current fiscal year that we're legislating in. So if we are, working on, come January, we will be working on the fiscal 22 budget. That begins at the beginning of July of 2001 and runs through the end of June of 2002. So it's off of the calendar year and slightly separate from the federal government's fiscal year, which I know a lot of us are familiar with. So we cannot choose to spend, we cannot legislate to spend money in fiscal year 22 with new mandates. We cannot bind the governor. So if we were to pass a bill next session, it would have to start spending money in fiscal year 23. And part of the problem is that we wind up creating all of these mandates because that is the only way that the legislature can actually force the governor to spend money in certain areas. And that means that every year we're stuck with sort of a whole, in many cases, unnecessary areas of spending that we have to affirmatively take out or change because we do not have the ability, again, like the federal government does or 49 other states do, to move money around within the budget. And then the last thing I will say, and then I'm happy to take questions, is there are, again, I mentioned 13 states in the country that have AAA bond ratings. We are the only one that has a system that we have today. So, you may hear from some opponents of this that this will, wildly throw our fiscal house out of order and really put us in jeopardy. That's nonsense. We would just be in line with the 12 other states in the country that have had AAA bond ratings and will continue Maryland's fiscal responsibility that has gotten us to the position that we're in today. So, Shruti, thank you for the opportunity to be here and happy to take any questions. And certainly if any of my colleagues who know the system as well as I do want to jump in, happy as well.
Thank you so much, Delegate Solomon. We appreciate that information. And I also want to mention Delegate Wilkins, who said in the chat that she can't emphasize enough how important question 1 is. So thank you for sharing that. As Michael Tardif, who is helping us with the questions in the chat, please feel free to put your questions there and we will recognize those questions and allow our elected officials to respond to that. But without further ado, at this time, I would like to call upon Delegate Eric Lutke to talk about question 2. And I also want to recognize MCDCC member Mimi Hassanein, who's on the call, as well as my colleagues from other caucuses and clubs. Delegate Lutke.
Thank you, Shruti. I hope everyone has noticed that Rich Madalino, who's now the chief, the CAO, Chief Administrative Officer for the county, is on this call. Rich used to be our budget expert in the Montgomery County delegation when he was a state senator. So I think he was taking notes on how Jared did in his explanation of question 1. I think he'll be sending you a grade later, Jared. Hopefully it's a good grade. High standards from Rich. I'm here to talk about gambling, which hopefully we won't go on too long about gambling. So there's a question on the ballot. Question 2 is a state question that would legalize sports betting in Maryland. And as you know, we've had casino gambling in Maryland since the voters approved it back in 2008. What this is essentially just a small expansion of what's allowable at the casinos and through electronic gaming. The thing to understand about sports betting is, first of all, every state around us, including Washington, D.C., which technically isn't a state, but darn well should be, has legalized sports betting already. In fact, if you've been in D.C. recently, you've probably seen some of the ads for their sports betting program. On top of that, sports betting is something that people have always done, right? I mean, I used to lay down $1 on the Kentucky Derby with my mom every year, right? But people don't only do that anymore, they also bet online through different types of apps. And all of that money that people are betting right now is going out of state. When somebody bets, does sports betting in Delaware or West Virginia or Pennsylvania, who's a Marylander, that's Maryland money that's going to fund things in other states. But of course, we have needs here in Maryland too. And so we estimate that if we legalize sports betting in Maryland, that it'll raise between $20 and $40 million annually in revenue. And that revenue, the vast majority of it is dedicated to education funding. And a question that keeps coming up with this education funding component, which is a totally fair question, is how can we be sure? Because if you'll remember, after casinos were first approved, there was a lot of criticism of the fact that governors, both frankly Democratic and Republican governors, were supplanting that money. Basically what they were doing is saying, okay, we got this much money from the casinos, so I'm gonna put less money into education from our other money, and the schools didn't really see an increase in funding. Well, the General Assembly, we didn't appreciate that. We put on the ballot a couple of years ago a question that protected this education funding from gambling revenue behind a constitutional lockbox. So that money now is absolutely dedicated. It will increase funding for our schools. And that's the long and short of question 2. There have always been, particularly among those of us in Montgomery County, disagreements about whether legalized gambling is something that we should be using to fund government. Those are questions that have arisen ever since the lottery was approved in the 1970s. And that's totally fair. I was opposed to the original legalization of casino gambling in Maryland. I look at this question a little bit differently. I look at it as, look, it's already here. We might as well make sure that the money that people are using on it is coming to fund Maryland services and not Pennsylvania services. So I happen to support question 2, but certainly understand that within our party, the Democratic Party, there will be disagreements over an issue like this.
Thank you, Delegate Lutke. There's a question in the chat that says, would question 2 allow funds to go towards horse racing or any other gambling activities involving animals?
That's a great question. And for those of you who aren't familiar, from the original slots revenue when casinos were approved, there is a small portion of the revenue that is dedicated to purses for horses and to racetrack funds. And that's what Tatiana is referring to. Tatiana, the answer to the question is no. None of the sports betting revenue will be dedicated to anything involving the horse racing industry or animals. There is a possibility where the reason that the authorizing legislation did not get fully across the line this past spring, and that we'll have to pass it this coming legislative session, is there have been discussions about making sure that there are opportunities for minority-owned businesses to participate in the industry. So there is the possibility that a small portion of the funds may be set aside to help support minority and women-owned businesses. But more importantly, we're going to hash out how to make sure that businesses that are owned by all kinds of people have an opportunity to fully participate in these licenses.
Thank you. Well, please continue to put your questions in the chat. Some of our elected officials may have to leave in some time, but however, we will make sure we continue to respond to the questions as we can. And with that, I would like to call upon our next speaker for the council question, which is Council Member Friedson.
Thank you, Shruti. Really appreciate you putting this together and leading this discussion, and appreciate my state colleagues and our great General Assembly delegation and presentation of the 2 state questions. I'm going to speak about the tax policy questions, question A and B. These are absolutely critical to the fate and future of Montgomery County. I'm proud to say that we have the full support of that entire General Assembly delegation for question A and against question B, along with a laundry list of Democratic and progressive organizations, but actually including the Democratic Party, but also a bipartisan coalition as well, including the last Republican to serve on the county council, Howie Dennis, a number of business groups like the Chamber of Commerce, environmental groups like Sierra Club, the teachers, and a host of others. So it is as broad a coalition as I think you could find on any issue in the county. Just to explain it, question A is the answer to a broken property tax system that we currently have that sets our property tax rates based on a really confusing formula based on last year's revenues plus inflation, with a number of exemptions and calculations and other things that you basically need a PhD in economic theory or an accountant, a lawyer, and a lot of red ink to be able to figure out how it all works. Why does that matter? It caps the amount of revenue that the county is able to generate and doesn't allow us to capture the benefit of a growing economy, rising property values, new residents for the most part in the county either. What question A would do was scrap that entire backwards policy that we've had for 30 years and replace it with a much simpler tax policy based on a tax rate, which is how almost every other jurisdiction in the country does property taxes. It's how the state does property taxes. And that would mean that whatever your tax rate is currently, it's currently just under 1%, 98 cents per 100 assessed of value. That will stay the same rate year over year unless 9 members of the county council vote unanimously to change it. It's simple, it's straightforward, just like tax policy should be. And the beauty of it is, by keeping tax rates stable and consistent year over year, it will generate tens of millions of dollars in revenue over time to support our schools, our parks, and our libraries. It's something that allows everybody to understand what the rates are. It allows us to, the county to do well when residents and businesses do well. It puts us all in the same boat together and allows us to be able to keep up with the priorities that we share. And so if we grow the tax base by growing our economy, by increasing our revenues, by rising property values, we won't have to raise the tax rate. That's what everybody strives to do. That's what every politician talks about. Let's grow the tax base, not necessarily grow the tax rates. We currently don't have a system that allows you to even do that. Question A would provide us with a basic, simple, straightforward system like almost every other jurisdiction in the country has. Question B, on the other hand, is Robin Ficker's latest proposal, the latest Ficker failure. It is bad, it is backwards, and it is broken, and it could bankrupt the county. And if there's another B word that is really, really negative, let me know, and we can add that one in too. But joking aside, question B takes the current system that we have that doesn't work and eliminates any ability to get out of it under any circumstances, including a global pandemic and an economic crisis that follows, like we're seeing with COVID-19. It would threaten our AAA bond rating, which is what we need to pay for schools and parks and libraries and transportation infrastructure and rec centers. And we shouldn't take that lightly. The county has had a AAA bond rating since the 1970s. And it might just sound like three letters that say that the county does a pretty good job with its fiscal stewardship, but it actually has real implications on real priorities that we all share. Losing our AAA bond rating, being downgraded based on what question B would likely result in, is $27 million in our capital budget. Think about what that means for schools, what that means for parks, what that means for libraries and for rec centers, what that means for our community, the infrastructure that we need to attract residents, to serve residents, to attract new businesses. All of that would be at risk based on what question B would do. Starting with the revenue and backing into the rate as we have traditionally done is totally backwards. It is the opposite of how it normally works. It works for Jeopardy to start with the answer. It doesn't work for tax policy. And by defeating question B, we could stop total disaster from happening. And by approving question A, by voting for question A, we can take a system that doesn't work and improve it to be able to provide the infrastructure that we want, to have the type of growth that we need, and to maintain the quality of life in Montgomery County that I think we all cherish, I think that we expect as residents, and that I think we deserve as residents. I'll just close by saying that question A is really about fiscal responsibility. Question B is about fiscal insanity. Question A is about betting on Montgomery County, betting on our economy, betting on the ability to attract residents and attract businesses, and having a rising tide that lifts all boats to support everybody in our community. Question B is joining Robin Ficker to bet against Montgomery County. I hope that we will reach out to our friends and our neighbors and our relatives and make sure everybody understands just how important these questions are. It literally will determine the type of community we have, the type of county that we have. And I hope that we can all work together to support 4A and against B, along with this broad bipartisan coalition of support. There is one question here that I will answer that I see from Marion Hertz about commercial and residential tax rates. Unlike in DC and in some other places that have different property tax rates for commercial properties and residential properties. We do not have different tax rates in Montgomery County for commercial and residential. However, there are about 9 property tax credits, some local, some state property tax credits, like the homestead tax credit, the senior tax credit, and others, the income tax offset credit. And most of those, actually all that I can think of, are specifically for owner-occupied property. So they do not benefit commercial property, but the rates start the same. There are some credits that change what you actually pay that benefit residents and not necessarily businesses, but it's a terrific question. This question either way would not change that there is no differentiation on property tax just based on the value of the property. With that, I'll turn it back to Shruti. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Council Member Andrew Friedson. That was very helpful and informative. And before we move, I do not see any other questions in the chat. And before we move on to the next questions on the county questions, I would actually like to call upon Rich Madalino, and you heard a wonderful introduction of him. And I wanted to see if he would like to comment on question A and question B, since he was also heading the budget for the Montgomery County.
Sure. Shruti, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. And Councilmember Friedson has really said it all. And it's so important to reiterate that everyone, the executive, the council, all of your elected officials are strongly for A and against B, because it really would put us in a fiscal death spiral. I mean, I think Andrew touched upon this in his remarks, but it would put us in the awful position where we would most likely lose our coveted AAA bond rating. Remember, as a jurisdiction, we have been AAA bond rated as a county for longer than any other county in the country. That is the level of stability and respect that Wall Street holds us in. We would jeopardize that with question B, which would put us in a situation of increasing expenditures while decreasing revenues. It really, as I just saw an analysis from the Maryland Center on Economic Policy, which I'm sure Delegate Solomon can tell you much about them as a think tank for progressive ideas. But for those of you who have followed national politics, they compare it to the California, if it was adopted, to the Colorado Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which has been one of the central items which has destroyed public services in Colorado and taken them more than a generation to fix. So truly the future of the county is at risk with question B. Another gift from Robin Ficker and the Donald Trump Republican Party of Montgomery County. So if we want to defeat Donald Trump within Montgomery County, not only is it voting against him, but is actually voting against question B and giving question A, your elected officials, the opportunity to make decisions that every other elected official, county elected official in Maryland deserves the right to have, and to be held accountable for their decisions. So please tell your friends and neighbors, vote for question A, vote against question B. And I'll be happy to stay around and answer questions as they come up.
Yeah, thank you so much. That would be really helpful. We got a couple of questions in our response sheet, and we will come to those in a minute. I do hope we will continue to have this conversation. I see something in the chat from Council Member Friedson. All right.
Yes, he was saying this is very similar to Proposition 13 in California, which, if you're an old hack like Andrew, you remember from the 1970s Proposition 13 passing in California, which decimated local governments and what were considered world-renowned schools. California struggles and has taken decades to climb out from that. And, and he mentions trim in Prince George's County. And I think this would be even worse than trim in Prince George's County, because at least trim locks you into a rate. It says the council can't go over a specific rate, which I think right now is 96 cents per $100. But at least as values grow, they get the ability to realize that additional value. I mean, one of the things that you hear the county executive, one of the things you hear council members talk about and have for a long time, we need to grow our local economy in order to grow the tax base. The irony in this is growing the tax base actually restricts the ability of the revenues to come into the county. So, the executive has been fond of pointing out, if we rented all the vacant space in the county tomorrow, we would not be able to recognize that gain for years, if at all. So it truly creates a problem for us. And I would just point out, again, because I just love doing these road shows with Andrew Friedson, as I'm sure he remembers 1990, when the council adopted I
was actually here for that one.
So yes, I remember your testimony in the council chamber. It really, when you think back to 1990 and you think about Montgomery County and Fairfax County, for those of you who have been alive and around this region for that long, our two counties were very similar. I think they were evenly regarded, and since 1990, you've seen a divergence, and I would argue part of that, and maybe a fair amount of it, is due to our inability to keep up with Fairfax County with making investments in our schools and our infrastructure, and that has been partly because of the charter limit, and that's why truly is the answer for us to create a competitive tax system with our neighbors in Virginia, in the district, and in the other counties around us in Maryland, because Frederick, Howard, Prince George's, none of them have this sort of insidious measure built into their charters, which would only be made worse by Ficker's amendment.
Two quick points on that, and then I have to run to another meeting, and I'm going to let Trudy go on with the meeting to keep things on track here. But California with Prop 13, which is very similar to this, I agree that this could be even worse with Question B than Prince George's has had. But in 1978, when Prop 13 was passed, which I wasn't there for, public education per pupil investment was 14th in the country. It's now 39th in the country in California, and California is now the fourth most unequal, rated as the fourth most unequal place in the country. So, in terms of an equity argument. So we don't have to think about the hypotheticals here. There are real life examples of the devastation that this can cause. And it's happened a little bit in Montgomery County, and we've been held back by it. Michael Tardif did a good job summarizing it in the chat. But we could make it better, or we could be in a situation where it gets dramatically worse, and that's why we have to be for A and against B. Thank you, Trudy. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedson. We appreciate your leadership on this issue, and I want to thank Rich Madaleno for also sharing that information with us. With that, I want to call on Michael Tardif, who will read a question from one of the response sheets.
We had a question from Helene Heibarger. Will there be a cap on how much you can raise property taxes in any given year, or is the sky the limit?
So the cap is that you need 9 members of the county council to unanimously vote to increase it. It's a higher standard and a higher bar than almost any other place in the country. I'm actually not aware of a unanimous 9-vote requirement to increase property taxes anywhere else. That would be maintained within this system. The cap, rather than being based on the revenue that we're allowed to collect, would be changed to be based on the rate that businesses and residents would pay each year. So there still would be a cap within this. It is significant protections for taxpayers, including a 9-vote unanimous requirement, which, by the way, some people think is way too high, is much higher than most democratic places where a majority, or in some cases a slight supermajority. And in Montgomery County, it was 7 votes until recently, when a previous Robin Ficker-led initiative at the county level raised it from 7 votes, a supermajority, which it was since 1990, to a unanimous vote of the county council, which is the highest bar you can possibly have without completely threatening the fiscal wherewithal and the AAA bond rating that a county would have.
Thank you so much. Michael, do we have another question? And then we can move on to Councilmember Glass.
Yes, we have a question from Barbara Garand, who's on the call. Please explain clearly, if you haven't already, why a homeowner should prefer the question A approach to the current one.
Well, the current system is set up where you don't know what your tax rate is year over year. It starts with the revenue, it increases it based on inflation. That's not good because it's not consistent, and I think consistency matters. It's also not good based on the current system because it's perverse. And it's perverse because the only time under the current system where tax rates can be raised and are raised is when you can afford it the least, when the economy is doing poorly. And actually there's evidence to suggest this as well. But if you start with the revenue, an arbitrary aspect based on you as a property owner, if the assessable base goes down, if property values go down because of a major economic downturn like the Great Recession, your tax rates could go up to replace the revenue. So we have a system right now that is set up where tax increases happen when you can afford it the least, and that doesn't capture the full benefit of economic growth and rising property values. So when a new development, when new buildings, when new investment comes into play, you are not benefiting as a taxpayer from that benefit. And so when we don't gain from the good times and we only have it from the bad times, can garner revenue during the bad times, that's a backwards policy that isn't set up to support homeowners, that isn't set up to support businesses. And that's why we have the strong support of the realtors who are very concerned, obviously, about property taxes and property values, just like everybody else, the Chamber of Commerce, along with all these progressive groups. So this is not a one part of a constituency, of one part of the political spectrum. This is as broad-based as it gets in Montgomery County politics.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Friedson. We do not have any other questions we received on question A and B. So with that, we are going to move on, and I would like to call upon Councilmember Evan Glass. Thank you so much for being with us today. Could you please talk about question C and question D?
Okay, thank you very much, Shruti, and Michael and all the other organizers for this conversation, and for all of you who are joining us. I know I am in between you and getting ready for the exciting vice presidential debate tonight. So I'll make some comments, we'll have some questions, and then we'll all get ready for the debate. And quite frankly, what we're talking about here in questions C and D are about meeting our growing needs for our growing and diverse community here in Montgomery County. But before I talk about what the impacts of questions C and D would be, let me take a step back and share with you the history of how we got here. The first county council was elected in 1970, and all 7 members, there were 7 members back then, they were elected at large. And in that arrangement, 5 of those members had to live in certain geographic areas, and 2 were elected regardless of where they live. And you might realize that is the exact same way that we elect the school board, the Board of Education today. But then in 1986, the voters, through referendum, decided to increase the size of the county council from 7 members to 9 members. And that ballot initiative passed in 1986. And when it went into effect in 1990, and it's still in place today, that makeup was 9 members, 5 of whom are elected in a council district where they have to reside and where they are elected solely by the people in that district. And then 4 who are elected at large, regardless of where they live, they are voted on by everybody in Montgomery County. And there's one really important element of this arrangement, and it's that residents get to vote for 5 council members, 4 who are at large and 1 from the district in which you reside. And those 5 members, you can call on any of them if you need a pothole filled, if you need a street light repaired, or if you want to lobby on environmental policy, on school funding, or any other issue that's important to you. So fast forward to today. And we know that residents have successfully submitted a petition to change our system, which would eliminate the at-large positions and create 9 new districts. This is question D. On its face, question D might seem sensible, but I think it would actually be a step backwards. And there are 2 main reasons why. First, establishing 9 districts would create a parochial system in which communities would be directly pitted against each other. Don't take my word for it. That's what former county executive Ike Leggett said, former Republican Congresswoman Connie Morella, and the Washington Post. And second, it would diminish the voice of you, every resident of Montgomery County, because it would diminish the number of council members you can vote for from 5 to just 1. And so I'm not sure why people would want to give up their representation at this point in time. So today, we're 30 years past when the first reform was made in 1990, when we created this current system. And we're on the precipice of change. So question D is what I just discussed, but I introduced at the council, and that was supported by my colleagues, is question C, that would increase the size of the council by adding 2 districts. So why do I think question C is a good proposal? Well, since the last restructure was made in 1990, the residential population of Montgomery County has increased by nearly 50%, 50. And that shift has resulted in us having the largest populated districts in the entire DC region, with more than 210,000 people per district. And so if we add 2 districts to our council, we will put our district sizes more in line with other jurisdictions in the area, and it would increase the diversity of the council, and most importantly, it would maintain your ability to vote for 5 members of the council. And so since I mentioned how other councils in the DC region are populated, let me share with you how they operate as well. The District of Columbia has 8 districts and 5 at-large members. And in Prince George's County, for decades, they had 9 districts, 9 independent districts, which is exactly what question D is proposing to do. Well, Prince George's County had that system for decades, and in 2018, they decided to change the system and add 2 at-large members because they recognized that 9 individual districts wasn't the most optimal system. So they added 2 districts. And if we look closer to home, the 2 largest municipalities here in Montgomery County, the cities of Gaithersburg and the cities of Rockville, they elect their council members all by an at-large system. So every member of those bodies are elected by every resident of the municipalities. And so, I think adding 2 districts is a step towards electoral progress because it would enhance our responsiveness to a rapidly growing constituency while also maintaining a very key element of our system, allowing every resident to vote for more than 1 member of the council. Question C is supported by Montgomery County teachers, by the SEIU, by the Montgomery County Democratic Party, and so many other groups. I will also add to that, earlier this week, the Bethesda Chamber of Commerce expressed its support for question C. So labor and business and the Democratic Party all together. Those groups also oppose question D, as does former County Executive Ike Leggett and former Republican Congresswoman Connie Morella. And so in summary, I think adding 2 districts is a better alternative for the voters of Montgomery County and our democratic process. And Trudy, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Evan Glass. I want to recognize Delegate Pam Queen from District 14, who just joined us. Thank you so much. And I'm looking at the chat for questions. We have one from Barbara saying, what is the cost of adding 2 more council members, salaries, COB changes right after the renovation, etc.?
That's a very good question, and I appreciate it. And so, the way I approach this is that we have to invest in our democracy. Just like we are investing in early voting sites, just like we're investing in mail-in drop boxes because we don't trust the United States Postal Service. And just like we invest in public campaign financing here in Montgomery County for candidates who don't want to accept money from special interests. just like I did, and all the at-large members and the county executive did. Those are all investments. And, case in point, each drop box that we have around the county, and I think there's about 50 of them around the county, each one of them costs about $3,000 to purchase and install, and it costs another $3,000 to provide the equipment to make sure that they're secure. So nearly $6,000 for each Dropbox, and there's about 50 of them. So that's about $300,000 for a temporary election measure. And so the cost of adding each council office, it costs about $550,000 for operating budget and staff of everybody in that office, including the council member themselves. But quite frankly, our population has grown by 50% over the last 30 years. And I think to create a more representative democracy within the context of a $5.8 billion budget, I think it's an investment worth making.
Thank you so much. We did receive some questions in advance, so I'm going to call on Michael Tardif to read one of those questions.
We didn't receive any questions regarding ballot questions C and D, Shruti.
Okay. I do not see any questions in the chat, but I would like to ask people if anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat. Councilmember Glass, would you like to share further comments?
Sure. Given that Councilmember Friedson and CAO Rich Madalino and I have been talking about the ballot questions quite a lot, the cost has come up quite a lot. And the other question that's come up more frequently is, where would these districts go? Where would they be drawn? And the simple reality is we don't know. We don't know where 7 new districts would be or 9 districts would be. And the reason for that is we are undergoing the census right now. The 2020 census is supposed to wrap up by the end of October, and we will use the data we receive from the census and give that data over to the redistricting commission, which we will install early next year. And every legislative body across America will redraw their districts, from the US Congress to the Maryland General Assembly to right here in the Montgomery County Council. And so now is the perfect time to actually have this conversation, because the redistricting committee will either be tasked with drawing 7 districts if question C passes, 9 districts if question D passes, or if the status quo prevails, they'll be charged with redrawing the current 5 districts. And we will only have districts based on the demographic data. And while it is true that parts of Clarksburg and Germantown and North Gaithersburg have grown a lot, it is equally as true that Bethesda and downtown Silver Spring and downtown Wheaton have grown tremendously in the last decade as well. So anyone who shares a map purporting to tell you where the new districts would be, or that they're all going to go up county or somewhere else, the fact is we do not know. But what I do know is that our population has grown 50%, and I think it is really important to expand our democracy at this point in time. 30 years after we expanded it from 7 members to 9, we should go from 9 to 11.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Glass. I really appreciate that. And I'm glad that you shared some of the responses to the questions that you have heard at the other forums that have been held. It's really helpful. I know that this is one of the topics that have frequently come up at the other forums, where residents want to understand the pros and cons of adding 2 more seats. So I really appreciate your all the information that you've given us today. Well, I see a couple of comments in the chat, which I'm sure our council members are reading, and you are welcome to put more questions and comments. But in the meantime, what I would like to do is make a couple of announcements, as well as my colleague, Michael Tardif, will share some information. Because of this important election year, there's a lot of amazing work that has been done by the Montgomery County Democratic Party. The precinct organization has been hosting Sunday phone canvasses and inviting our district legislators to join us to make calls, as well as we will be having our congressional representatives starting October 18th. Congressman Sarbanes, Congressman Trone, and Congressman Raskin joining us each of the consecutive Sundays. So please make sure that you are reading that information in the newsletter and also signing up to help us make some calls, because it is so important that voters understand how they can return their ballot in this election year. With that, I want to call on Michael. We did receive a couple of questions in the response sheet, but Michael, who also co-chairs the Communications Committee for the Montgomery County Democratic Party, has done an amazing job in updating the website. And that's a great resource right now for anybody looking for any information. So Michael, you are on mute.
Technical guy doesn't know his technical stuff. Thanks. I'll put the URL in the chat for our election pages, but it's mcdcc.org/vote 2020. We received a couple of questions in advance regarding the election. One that I think is important, we've heard it before. Bayan Trock asked, I received a download ballot. In other words, he had requested that he receive his ballot electronically, which you have to download, complete, and mail. And now I hear that they take too long to count. Can I order a mail-in pre-printed ballot now? The short answer is yes. Until the deadline of October 20, you can submit another request, and your latest request will become your ballot request. However, we would not advise you to do that. It is true that the ballots that you download and print and mail have to be transferred. Your votes have to be transferred to a scannable ballot. So it takes longer for the Board of Elections to process that ballot. But I would not say that it takes too long, and I would advise you not to worry about it. You may create additional confusion, or there may be a delay in your second request being processed. So if you are receiving your ballot by electronic means, complete the ballot and submit it, and it will be counted. And the Board of Elections is prepared to do that. Another good question that came in, and I believe it was someone who's on the call, I think it was Clara Lovett, asked, that's correct, when will ballots dropped in ballot drop boxes before November 3 be counted? I just got a report from the Board of Elections yesterday. The canvass began yesterday. Let me explain what that means. When the Board of Elections receives the ballots, and typically they're receiving mail-in ballots on the pre-printed ballots that were sent to voters, the first thing they do is separate those ballots from the envelope that it came in. They check off that that voter has voted, and they prepare those ballots to be scanned. The scanning of the ballots will not begin until October 22. I believe that's by order of the governor, allowing ballot counting to begin before Election Day on November 3. But the preparation of the ballots to be scanned has begun and will continue until October 22, which should help tremendously to enable the Board of Elections to have those ballots counted by Election Day or shortly thereafter. They will also, for those ballots that they are receiving from folks who downloaded and printed their ballots, they will be transferring those votes to scannable ballots so that those ballots are ready to be counted on October 22. The other information that came in that report is that there were a total of 306,000 mail-in ballots requested by Montgomery County voters. Don't quote me, but we have just over 600,000 registered voters in Montgomery County. So that's a little bit more than half, which is a remarkable number of requests for mail-in ballots. And they've only received a very small number so far, of course, because the ballots have just gone out like a week or so ago. And I think those were the only questions that were related to the election itself or to the ballots, Shruti.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael.
There were a couple of other questions on C and D, and I had overlooked them. I apologize, but I'm looking through the questions, and I think that Evan addressed all of those questions in his remarks.
Okay, and I believe we still have Councilmember Glass on the Zoom. Is that correct? We still have him?
Here.
Yes, I see you. I see you. Well, I see something in the chat that says, please explain to me how you came up with 11 members the day after the 9 district people got their last signature. It's rather suspicious.
It's not suspicious at all. The conversation about the council makeup has been going on over the last year. It was conducted by the Montgomery County Charter Review Commission. And I attended about 4 different meetings of the Charter Review Commission. One during a regular meeting of theirs, and then they held field hearings back in the day when we could have personal, in-person meetings to talk about the makeup of the council. And I went, and a lot of people went. And during those conversations, I shared my thoughts about the council. And if you read the Charter Review Commission report, it clearly states in there that I've been talking about adding 2 districts. And before talking about 2 districts with the Charter Review Commission, I talked about having 2 districts before I was a council member. So this goes back a number of years, because before I was even elected, I recognized that our local democracy and local representation wasn't keeping up with the population. And so when this conversation erupted and the Charter Review Commission brought it to a fore, I took the opportunity to introduce it, and a majority of my colleagues supported it so that we could have a robust conversation with all of the residents of Montgomery County. So this is something that I've been personally talking about for years, and it's on the record that I've been talking about it for more than a year in my capacity as a council member.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Glass. That does not sound suspicious to me, but I would encourage all our voters on the call to make sure that you are checking out information on the ballot questions on the MCDCC website /ballot questions. Please share this information because it's important for our residents to understand why these ballot questions have been proposed and why they are important. With that, I would like to call upon Delegate Pam Queen, who joined us a bit late, but I'd like to recognize her and invite her to make some brief remarks.
Okay, well, thank you, Shruti. I just want to say hi to everyone. I'm sorry I'm a little late. I teach classes on Wednesday nights, so it's a little harder for me to get to some of the events. But this is just a great forum for us to have to make sure we're educating our community on these very important issues. And so I really want to thank the District 14 Club, District 18, District 20 Democratic Club, Ashbury Democratic Club, Leisure World Democratic Club, and Greater Silver Spring Democratic Club for bringing this information to you to make sure everyone has the information about why these ballot questions are so important to us, and make sure you have all your questions answered. And so we hope that you will help with getting out the vote, getting out this information to the community, and sure, please call on any of us for any extra information or details. So thank you for having this tonight and engaging in this very important town hall. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Delegate Queen. And I want to remind everyone again that the Precinct Organization Committee for the Montgomery County Democratic Party is hosting phone canvassing to Montgomery County voters every Sunday from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Since this campaign was kicked off on August 30th, volunteers have made nearly 5,000 phone calls. And we are hearing from our residents about questions they have on mail-in ballot, how to request a ballot, where to drop it off, where the early voting sites are, and also making sure that they have information on the ballot questions. So if you have half an hour or some time to give to those, please make sure you sign up and help make some phone calls and connect with fellow Democrats in your neighborhood, in your district, and anywhere in Montgomery County. If there are no other questions, I am going to call upon Rich Madalino again one more time to see if he has any closing remarks to share.
I want to say thank you on behalf of the county executive for all of your participation and your support for the party. It's great to have everyone unified around all of these ballot questions because they're so important for them to pass, fail, depending upon the vote. There's a tremendous number of graphics I know Councilmember Glass put up a new graphic I had not seen before in his email today, which was a great summary of the four. And I was hoping he would share that on social media if he hasn't already.
You'll be seeing it in a tweet later tonight.
Okay, well, I will be retweeting that. But there are graphics. There are a variety of different campaigns out there for A, against B and D, for A and C, against B and D. So there are all sorts of different groupings out there. Many of our legislators have posted great graphics about questions 1 and 2. Please look at all of those different social media feeds. Please share them out to your groups so that people can see, because it's helpful to see it. And in fact, Democrats like to hear what other Democrats are doing. So it is very helpful for that message to get out. And in fact, on many of these issues, Democratic elected officials are seen as having elected officials who are Democrats have strong credibility with the voters. So sharing that information out would be very, very helpful. So everyone, take down Councilmember Glass's Twitter feed. He's going to give you the account right now.
It's in the chat.
It's in the chat. He's already put it in the chat, at Evan M. Glass. So make sure you follow him. Make sure you share that. It's a great little summary. I'm sure Delegate Queen has put up stuff for her. I don't know which legislators is still on, but have the state graphics that the Democratic caucuses in the House and Senate have been sharing. So please share that around so that everyone can see and get that simple message.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those comments. And I also want to mention that the Montgomery County Democratic Party is recruiting volunteers who are willing and interested in volunteering for voter protection at our voting centers. If you are interested or know of anyone who would like to help, please email me at shruti_bhatnagar@yahoo.com. I'm working with Joe Gebhardt, who's the lead for the voter protection. And in the MCDCC newsletter soon, you will be seeing information about that. But we want to make sure there is a presence at the voting centers to help guide anybody. There's going to be all safety precautions that will be taken by volunteers, including the Montgomery County Democratic Party giving a safety kit to make sure they have masks and gloves and keeping social distancing, as well as no interaction in terms of exchanging any materials. But we will provide materials that will be put on the site for anybody who would like to have a sample ballot or just have information on what the hotline number is to call if they have any questions. So with that, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know everyone is looking forward to today's forum. So I just want to thank all of you for joining us, all our elected representatives, and many, many thanks to our co-hosts from the different Democratic clubs and caucuses, to Michael Tardif, who really helped us organize the Zoom and announcements and has been a great resource, and is also from District 18, so hooray. And all our fellow Democrats, thank you all so much. Please stay safe, continue to be well, and vote for Democrats up and down the ballot. Let's make sure we get Democrats elected in 2020. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Judy.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Nice to see you. Good night. Good night.
Thank you for everything.
Go Dem.
Stay blessed. Stay blessed.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Don't forget to follow people that are in the Twitter.
Good night, everyone.